My name is Julian Conley. This is habitat suitability modeling of the introduced slider turtle in Europe. The slider turtle, Trachomys scripta, is a mammitid turtle endemic to the southeast United States, where it's common in pond and wetland environments, as well as urban and modified habitats. It's become popular in the exotic pet trade, which has led to range extension and introduced populations throughout the United States, as well as other parts of the world, where it competes with local endemic turtle species and often outcompetes them for resources. The purpose of this study is to create a habitat suitability model for slider turtles in Europe, where they have been introduced, based on the current distribution of endemic and introduced populations in the United States, with the hope of helping to conserve endemic turtle populations in Europe. Occurrence point data for the turtle were taken from GBIF and entered into ArcPro. The points were rarefied to 1 kilometer. Training and testing points were created with a ratio of 80 to 20. Rasters for 6 bioclimatic variables were selected and added to ArcPro. These were altitude, annual mean temperature, maximum temperature of warmest month, minimum temperature of coldest month, annual precipitation, and precipitation of driest month, which were selected because they should have an impact on an aquatic reptile population. The rasters were masked to the USA and Europe separately to create 2 separate regions, and then MaxScent was used to create habitat suitability models for the United States based on the training points of Trachomys scripta, and then the results of this were projected onto Europe to create a potential habitat suitability model of the slider turtle in Europe. So the habitat suitability model for the United States shows suitable habitat in its endemic range of the southeast, as well as the introduced ranges of the Northeast, Great Lakes, and Pacific Coast. If we look at the training and testing points, we can see that it is most common within its endemic range, as well as the introduced populations. However, we also see isolated populations in areas such as Denver, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City, where they're most likely living in urban modified environments and not in wild settings. If we look at the suitability model for Europe, we can see the most suitability is in Mediterranean climates such as Portugal, Spain, Italy, and France. It also appears to have high suitability in the Danube watershed. If we look at GBIF's occurrence point data for Trachomys in Europe, we see that it is fairly common in Mediterranean climates, not so common in the Danube yet. This may be due to a lack of sampling, may also be that the turtle has not been introduced to this region yet. However, we also see a very, very high proportion of turtles in the Netherlands and Belgium, which we'll discuss further. The statistics from MaxScent show a fairly high area under the curve for both models, around 78%. With 10% training presence, the omission for both models was 10%, and the commission was just above 40%, which is fairly good. Shows that these models are doing a fairly good job of predicting suitability for the turtle. If we look at which bioclimatic variables had the biggest impact on the slider's distribution, annual mean temperature and minimum temperature of coldest month both suggest that these have a threshold under which they cannot survive. And then annual precipitation shows that they don't actually like very high precipitation. They prefer somewhat more arid environments. So in conclusion, MaxScent did a fairly good job of creating habitat suitability models and projecting them onto Europe to show us where turtles could be living in Europe and where they could potentially spread in the future. Mediterranean areas do have high suitability. The Danube watershed should be an area of concern, especially with climate change, bringing temperatures up and decreasing that minimum threshold for turtle survival. Belgium and the Netherlands suggest that human population density may be another factor to take into account, especially since these turtles are mainly spread and introduced through the exotic pet trade by intentional release of private people. So the best strategy for limiting the spread of slider turtles is to restrict the exotic pet trade, increase education and awareness of turtle care, as well as monitoring introduced populations and conserving locally endemic European turtle populations. Thank you.